In lesson 4, we'll talk about the silent speakers. With that expression, we refer to minoritized language speakers, which in many occasions do not use their own language to address other people or to answer to other people addressing them. If we have a look on the observable behaviors of these kind of speakers, we find a lot of people who are proactively submissive, meaning they will start all or most of their interactions through the dominant language, in practically hiding that they are speakers of a different language. Then we've got another portion of people who are reactively submissive, meaning that they will perhaps start through their own language but then switch into the dominant language as soon as the other speaker, the other person, shows that they are not minoritized language speakers. And then we've got resilient people who try to hold the fort as far as they can, but there are very few people that never switch into the dominant language. When do we do that? So when do minoritized language speakers switch into the dominant language? They do it in many contexts, which are decisive, of course. We've got to take into account that most of our verbal interactions are the frequent ones, meaning the ones we have with family, friends, acquaintances, workmates, etc. Those are difficult to classify, meaning each one is special in itself and has to be addressed maybe in a different way. But when we interact with unknown people, when we get into a bar or go to a shop to buy something, this kind of interactions can be classified according to a traffic light code. And the traffic light means exactly what a traffic light means. If it's green, it means you can go through. If it's yellow, it means you can think what's more convenient, if accelerating or braking. And if it's red, it means you should stop. According to this code, when we switch into dominant language at first sight, or simply when someone shows poor understanding, for example, they say sorry, or I beg your pardon, or what, or when someone is even speaking our own language, but we believe they are not native speakers, and then we switch into the dominant language. We could consider an intermediate step when someone says they don't speak the language. That occurs a lot when the DL and the ML are intercomprehensible, and then you're, for example, shopping for something and you've had a couple of interactions with the clerk, and then they tell you, sorry, I don't speak your language, but they are understanding you. That would be let's say the intermediate step. And then the red ones would be when they tell us that they don't understand our language, they can't, or when they specifically ask for a language switch. Those two are the only occasions in which dominant language speakers, if they know another language, might consider the possibility to switch into this other language, while for minoritized languages the tendency is to get down, meaning to switch into the dominant language in layers which are really not interactive. For example, simply deciding that someone doesn't look like a native speaker. So we will focus on the green layers, the ones that we can get through if we like, so they depend on us exclusively. The first one would be when we switch at first sight, that we decide that they don't look like minority language speakers. How does an ML speaker look like? That's just not reasonable anymore. I mean, independently of ethnic characteristics, clothing, etc., every person has the capacity to know a language and then to be a speaker of this language. So no need to change when we still don't know if they are or are not ML speakers. Then, in many occasions, ML speakers switch into the dominant language when the interlocutor just shows poor understanding. That can be asking what or sorry, etc. Well, in many occasions, that can just be that they have not heard or properly understood because there is noise or whatever. The only reason to ask for a repetition is not ignoring the language. Many people who don't ignore the language also ask for a repetition. And this is particularly perverse, let's say. So first, how do you know they are not ML speakers? You don't know it, you just are figuring it because maybe they speak with an accent, they speak poorly, or they have resource to the dominant language to address you. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. They could be from a different region and then have a different accent. They can be learners of your language, or they could be just submissive ML speakers. So in all three green layers, we are risking a phenomenon which would be really prejudicial to the language, which is ML speakers speaking, interacting among them through the dominant language. Since we cannot identify each other out of external signs such as skin color or other signs, the only way to identify each other is if we hear the other one speaking our own language. If we talk among us through the dominant language, then the ML becomes absolutely unnecessary, and languages which are not necessary will die. So only in the third layer, when we identify someone as not a native speaker, maybe if they are trying to learn our own language, then that would be really rude. Just imagine that you are making the effort to learn a language, and then when you go to the country and you try to speak it, people answer you back in your own language, as if considering that you're not able to learn the language or you're not good enough for that. So that would be really rude behavior. Remember that everybody speaks with an accent, and also remember that beginners do not speak perfectly, and they get better and better if we give them the opportunity. And giving them the opportunity is just answering back in the same language that they are using to address us. So that's it. And in the second part of this lesson, we'll try to find some ways to stop being silent speakers and to get a voice for ourselves.